My farm was destroyed by a summer wildfire, so I went to my daughter's house. Her husband blocked the door. "You'll ruin my Persian rug. I have no place for a homeless woman." Desperate, I called my late neighbor's son, a boy I treated like my own, now a billionaire. Nobody knew I had his number. When he landed his helicopter on their lawn and said 3 words, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought I'd be standing on my own daughter's doorstep, begging for a place to sleep. At 64 years old, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the acrid smell of smoke still clinging to my hair, I knocked on Kalia's pristine white door with trembling fingers. The wildfire had taken everything. 43 years of memories, sweat, and dreams reduced to ash in a single afternoon. My farmhouse, the barn where I'd raised prize-winning cattle, the apple orchard my late husband Frank had planted with his own hands, all gone. The insurance adjuster said it would take months to process my claim, and even then, it might not cover rebuilding costs. I had nowhere else to go. Kalia opened the door wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in 3 months. Her perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up when she saw me, and I watched her take in my soot-stained jeans and the small duffel bag containing what little I'd managed to save. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Her voice carried that familiar tone of inconvenience I'd grown used to over the years. "The farm burned down, sweetheart. I lost everything." My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay strong. "I was hoping I could stay with you and Louis for a few days while I figure things out." Before Kalia could respond, Louis appeared behind her. My son-in-law had always been particular about appearances, but the look of horror that crossed his face when he saw me standing there was something I'd never forget. "Absolutely not," he said, stepping protectively in front of his wife. "Look at you. You're covered in ash and God knows what else. You'll ruin my Persian rug. That thing cost $15,000. I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "I could clean up first, Louis. I just need—" "What you need is to figure out your own problems," he interrupted, his voice cold as winter. "We have a certain lifestyle here, Ada. Image matters. I can't have a homeless woman sleeping on my couch when my business associates might drop by." Homeless woman. The words hit me like a physical blow. In his eyes, that's all I was now. Not his mother-in-law, not the woman who'd raised the daughter he claimed to love. Just another burden to be discarded. Kalia shifted uncomfortably beside him, but she didn't contradict her husband. My own daughter, the child I'd nursed through pneumonia at age 6, who I'd worked double shifts to put through college, stood there in silence while her husband called me homeless. "Please," I whispered, hating how desperate I sounded. "I raised you, Kalia. I sacrificed everything for you. Doesn't that mean anything?" For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then Louis placed a possessive hand on her shoulder, and whatever compassion might have been there vanished. "Mom, you have to understand our position," Kalia said, her voice carefully measured. "We live in an exclusive neighborhood. Louis is right about appearances. Maybe you could try calling your sister in Portland." My sister in Portland, who hadn't spoken to me in 8 years after our falling out over Frank's funeral arrangements. My sister who'd made it clear I wasn't welcome in her life. Kalia knew this, yet she suggested it anyway. "I see," I managed, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I understand perfectly." Louis was already closing the door. "I'm sure you'll figure something out, Ada. You always were resourceful." The door shut with a decisive click, leaving me standing alone on their manicured porch. Through the frosted glass window, I could see their silhouettes moving away, probably returning to whatever expensive dinner they'd been enjoying before I interrupted their perfect evening. I stood there for several minutes, shock and disbelief warring with a pain so deep it felt like drowning. This was my daughter, my only child. The little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when I had to work late shifts at the diner to make ends meet. Where was that child now? My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Kalia. "Mom, I'm sorry, but Louis is right. Maybe this is the wake-up call you need to start planning for your future more responsibly. There are senior living facilities that might help." Senior living facilities. Code for anywhere but here. I walked back to my old pickup truck, the one thing that had survived because I'd driven it to town for supplies when the fire started. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. Where could I go? The nearest motel was 30 miles away, and I only had $217 in my checking account. As I sat in the truck, the full weight of my situation crashed over me. I was 64, homeless, and apparently unwanted by my own family. The farm that had been my identity, my livelihood, my legacy, gone. The daughter I'd devoted my life to raising, lost to greed and social climbing. But as I stared at their perfect house with its perfect lawn and perfect facade, something shifted inside me. The crushing despair began to transform into something else, something harder. Something that had been building for years as I watched Kalia become someone I barely recognized. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in 15 years. My finger hovered over the number, heart pounding. Would he even remember me? Would he care? There was only one way to find out. But as I stared at that name on my phone screen, I realized my daughter had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had no idea who she'd just turned away. None of them did. And when they found out what I'd been keeping from them all these years, their perfect little world would never be the same. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Kalia had just struck the match. Sitting in that parking lot outside Kalia's house, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. Each one felt like a knife twist, reminding me of everything I'd given up for the daughter who'd just slammed the door in my face. I remembered the day Frank died. Kalia was only 12, crying so hard at the funeral that she made herself sick. I held her all night in that narrow hospital bed while she threw up from grief, promising her that everything would be okay, even though I had no idea how I'd keep that promise. Frank's life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. The farm was drowning in debt, and I had a 7th-grade daughter who needed stability more than ever. So I did what any mother would do. I worked. I worked 3 jobs. Breakfast shift at Murphy's Diner, afternoon cleaning houses for the wealthy families on the hill, and night shifts at the textile factory when I could get them. Kalia never knew about the nights I cried myself to sleep, exhausted and aching, wondering if I was strong enough to hold everything together. She never saw me eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so there'd be enough money for her school clothes. She was just a child. She shouldn't have had to know. But what broke my heart most was how she started looking at me during those years. Like I was an embarrassment. Like my calloused hands and tired eyes somehow made me less than the other mothers who drove fancy cars and didn't smell like diner grease. When she was 16, she stopped bringing friends home. "It's just easier to hang out at their houses, Mom," she'd say. What she meant was that their houses were nicer, their mothers more polished. I wasn't the kind of mother she wanted her friends to see. I should have been angry. Instead, I worked harder. I wanted to give her everything those other kids had. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own future, telling myself it would all be worth it when she succeeded. The irony wasn't lost on me now. All those years of trying to make Kalia's life perfect, and she'd grown up to become exactly like the people who'd looked down on us. But there was another child in those memories. A boy whose story was intertwined with ours in ways Kalia never fully understood. Tommy Peterson lived in the falling down house next to our farm. His parents were the town drunks. Everyone knew it, but nobody talked about it. Not directly. When Tommy was 8 years old, he started showing up at our kitchen door during dinner time, always with some excuse. "My mom wanted to know if you had any sugar. Can I pet your cats? My dad says, do you need help with anything?" The truth was written all over his thin frame and hollow eyes. The boy was hungry, and not just for food. He was starving for kindness, for someone to notice him, for a place where raised voices didn't mean someone was about to get hurt. Frank saw it before I did. "That boy needs looking after," he said one evening as we watched 8-year-old Tommy through our kitchen window, sitting alone on his front steps. "His folks aren't right." After Frank died, Tommy became my shadow. He'd appear every morning before school, helping with farm chores without being asked. When I came home from my shifts, exhausted and barely able to stand, he'd have already fed the chickens and gathered the eggs. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart," I told him one afternoon when I found him mucking out stalls that were supposed to be my responsibility. I like helping, he said simply. Besides, you take care of everyone else. Someone should take care of you too. That's when I knew this boy had an old soul. He was only 9, but he understood something about love and loyalty that many adults never learn. He understood that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. Tommy never complained when his father came home drunk and violent. He never asked me to call social services, though God knows I should have. Instead, he'd just show up at my door with his homework, and I'd let him do it at my kitchen table while I cooked dinner. On the worst nights, when the yelling from next door got too loud, I'd find him sleeping in our barn come morning. Kalia tolerated him because I insisted, but she never truly accepted him. Why does he always have to be here? She'd whine when Tommy joined us for Sunday dinners or family movie nights. Because he needs us, I'd tell her. Sometimes we're the family people choose, not just the one they're born into. She'd roll her eyes and retreat to her room. Even at 12, 13, 14, Kalia had already decided that Tommy Peterson was beneath her notice. He was poor, his clothes were second-hand, and his parents were the kind of people respectable families whispered about. But I saw something in that boy. A fierce intelligence that school couldn't quite nurture. A determination that reminded me of my own younger self. When he was 15, he taught himself computer programming from library books. When he was 16, he was fixing neighbors' computers for spending money. When he was 17, he was already talking about college, about getting out of our small town and making something of himself. The last real conversation I'd had with Tommy was the night before he left for college. He'd earned a full scholarship to MIT, something that still amazed our small-town high school counselor. We sat on my front porch, sharing a thermos of coffee and watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Miss Ada," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" I squeezed his hand. "You would have found a way, Tommy. You're stronger than you know. Maybe. But you gave me something I never had before." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You gave me a family. A real one. That was 15 years ago." Tommy Peterson had kept in touch for the first few years of college, sending me Christmas cards and the occasional letter about his studies. Then life took over, the way it does, and the contact grew sporadic. Last I'd heard through town gossip, he'd graduated from MIT and moved to Silicon Valley. Someone said he'd started his own company, but I'd never paid much attention to the rumors. Now, sitting in my truck outside Kalia's perfect house, I stared at his name in my phone contacts. Thomas Peterson, the scared little boy who used to help me feed chickens, had become a man I barely knew. Would he even remember the woman who'd made him peanut butter sandwiches and helped him with homework? More importantly, would he care that she needed help now? My finger hovered over his number as another painful realization hit me. I had raised 2 children in that farmhouse. One was my biological daughter, who'd just proven that blood meant nothing to her when it came to inconvenience. The other was a boy I'd chosen to love, who'd chosen to love me back. Maybe it was time to find out which kind of family really mattered. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. 15 years. It had been 15 years since I'd heard Tommy's voice, and here I was, about to call him at my lowest moment. What if he'd forgotten me? What if he was busy, successful, surrounded by important people who wouldn't understand why some old farm woman was interrupting his evening? But what choice did I have? I was 64, homeless, and apparently worthless to my own daughter. The truck was getting cold, and I needed to make a decision before the local motel filled up for the night. I pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart sank with each ring. Of course he wouldn't answer. Why would a successful businessman take calls from unknown numbers at 8:30 on a Friday evening? I was about to hang up when I heard his voice. "Hello?" It was deeper now, mature, but there was something in the tone that made my throat close up with recognition. This was still Tommy, my Tommy, even after all these years. "Tommy?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "This is Ada. Ada Morrison from... Miss Ada?" The change in his voice was instant, electric. "Miss Ada, "Oh my God. Are you okay? Is everything all right?" He remembered. Not only did he remember, but the first thing he asked was if I was okay. Tears started flowing before I could stop them. "I'm sorry for calling you out of the blue like this," I managed through my tears. "I know it's been so long, and you probably have a family now, responsibilities." "Stop," he said firmly but gently. "Don't you dare apologize. You can call me anytime, anywhere, for anything. You know that. Now tell me what's wrong." So I did. I told him about the wildfire, about losing the farm, about standing on Kalia's doorstep only to be turned away like a beggar. I told him about Louis calling me homeless, about Kalia's silence, about having nowhere to go. The words poured out like water through a broken dam. 15 years of distance collapsing in the span of a single phone call. Tommy listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and growing anger. When I finished, there was a long pause that made my stomach clench with fear. Had I burdened him too much? Had I presumed too much on a relationship that existed decades ago? "Miss Ada," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "that woman is not the little girl you raised. What Kalia did tonight is unforgivable." The fierce protectiveness in his voice reminded me of the teenage boy who used to get angry when kids at school said cruel things about my secondhand clothes or my multiple jobs. Even then, Tommy had defended me more fiercely than my own daughter ever had. "She's still my daughter," I said weakly, though the words felt hollow. "No," Tommy said with quiet certainty. "A daughter doesn't abandon her mother. A daughter doesn't call the woman who sacrificed everything for her homeless. You know what you are to me, Miss Ada? You're the only mother I ever really had. And no mother of mine is going to spend tonight in a shelter or a car." My breath caught. "Tommy, I wasn't calling to ask for money or—" "I know you weren't. That's exactly why I'm going to help you. Where are you right now?" I looked around the parking lot, still within sight of Kalia's house. "I'm still in Millbrook. In my truck outside Kalia's house, actually. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you're in shock, which is completely understandable. Are you safe to drive?" "I think so." "Good. There's a Marriott about 20 miles north on Route 9. Do you know it?" I did. It was the fancy hotel where Kalia and Louis had held their wedding reception. "Yes, but Tommy, I can't afford—" "You're not paying for anything. I'm going to call them right now and book you a suite. Get yourself there, order room service, take a hot bath, and try to get some sleep. Can you do that for me? A suite at the Marriott." I couldn't even imagine what that would cost. But Tommy was talking like money was no object. "Tommy, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. You took care of me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to take care of you." His voice softened. "Besides, you're going to need to be well rested for tomorrow." "Tomorrow? I'm flying out first thing in the morning. I'll be there by noon." "Flying out?" My mind struggled to process this. "Where are you flying from?" "San Francisco." "Don't worry about the details, Miss Ada. Just focus on getting somewhere safe tonight. I'll handle everything else." San Francisco was 3,000 miles away. The idea that Tommy would drop everything and fly across the country just because I called seemed impossible. "You don't have to come all this way. I just needed to hear a friendly voice." "Miss Ada." His voice was gentle but firm. "Do you remember what you told me the night before I left for college?" I thought back to that evening on my front porch, the thermos of coffee, the sunset. I remember we talked about a lot of things. "You told me that family takes care of family, no matter what. You said that when someone you love is hurting, you don't hesitate, you don't make excuses, you just show up." The words came back to me then. I'd been trying to prepare him for the world beyond our small town, trying to teach him about loyalty and love in a way his own parents never had. "I remember," I whispered. "Well, I'm showing up. And Miss Ada, there's something else you need to know. Something about what I've been doing with my life since I left Millbrook." My heart started beating faster. There was something in his voice, a weight that suggested this conversation was about to take another turn. "What is it, sweetheart?" "The company I started after MIT? It's done pretty well for itself. Actually, it's done better than well. Miss Ada, I'm not just comfortable, I'm wealthy. Very wealthy. The word hung in the air between us. Wealthy. The boy who used to wear my late husband's hand-me-down shirts because his own clothes had holes in them was wealthy. How wealthy? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Forbes put my net worth at $2.8 billion last year. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. Billion. Not million. Billion. Tommy Peterson, the skinny kid who used to help me gather eggs, was a billionaire. I know it's a lot to process, he continued. But here's what matters. Every success I've ever had, every dollar I've ever earned, every achievement that's brought me to this point, it all started in your kitchen, Miss Ada. You gave me the foundation that made everything else possible. I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the scared little boy in my memories with the man on the phone who was casually discussing billions of dollars. Tomorrow, when I get to Millbrook, we're going to have a conversation with your daughter and her husband. They're going to learn exactly who they turned away tonight. But more importantly, you're never going to worry about having a roof over your head again. I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me. Tommy, I don't need billions of dollars. I know you don't. That's one of the reasons you deserve them. His voice grew warmer, more tender. Miss Ada, for 15 years I've been trying to figure out how to repay you for saving my life. Tomorrow, I finally get the chance. As I hung up the phone and started the truck to drive to the Marriott, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Kalia had just refused shelter to a woman who'd raised a billionaire who still called her his real mother. My daughter had no idea what was coming for her, but she was about to find out that some mistakes can't be undone, and some bridges, once burned, take everything else down with them. The boy I'd chosen to love was coming home, and he was bringing enough power to change all our lives forever. I woke up in the most luxurious hotel room I'd ever seen. Egyptian cotton sheets, marble bathroom, a view of the mountains that took my breath away. For a moment, I forgot where I was and why I was there. Then it all came rushing back. The fire, Kalia's rejection, Tommy's phone call. Even in the morning light, it seemed impossible. The scared little boy from next door was now worth billions, and he was flying across the country to help me. I checked my phone, 9:47 in the morning. He'd said he'd be here by noon. I'd barely finished my complimentary breakfast when my phone rang. Miss Ada? I just landed at the regional airport. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Landed. Not my plane landed, or the flight arrived. Just I landed, like he owned the aircraft. Which, I was beginning to realize, he probably did. Should I meet you in the lobby? Actually, I was thinking we might pay a visit to your daughter and her husband first. If you're up for it. My stomach clenched. Tommy, I don't want any trouble. There won't be trouble. I just think it's time they understood who they turned away last night. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just let me do the talking. 23 minutes later, I heard a sound that made everyone in the hotel lobby look up. It was the unmistakable whop 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 of helicopter blades, growing louder by the second. I walked outside just in time to see a sleek black helicopter settling onto the hotel's front lawn. The hotel staff rushed around frantically, probably trying to figure out if this was legal, while guests pressed against windows to get a better look. The helicopter door opened, and Tommy Peterson stepped out. I barely recognized him. The skinny boy with second-hand clothes had been replaced by a man in an impeccably tailored suit, moving with the quiet confidence that comes from having enough power to reshape the world around you. But when he saw me, his entire face transformed into the warm smile I remembered from 15 years ago. Miss Ada. He walked straight to me and wrapped me in the kind of hug that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. He was taller than I remembered, broader, but his arms still felt like safety. Look at you, I whispered, pulling back to study his face. You're all grown up. Thanks to you. His eyes were serious now. Are you ready for this? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for anything anymore. The helicopter ride to Kalia's neighborhood took less than 5 minutes. Tommy had called ahead to get permission to land on the municipal park across from her house, though I suspected someone with his resources didn't really need to ask permission for much. As we descended, I could see people coming out of their houses, pointing at the helicopter. This was Millbrook's exclusive Woodlawn Estates, where the biggest excitement was usually someone getting a new BMW. A private helicopter landing in their neighborhood was definitely not normal. I spotted Kalia's house, then Kalia herself, standing in her front yard with Louis beside her. They were staring at the helicopter with the same bewildered expression as their neighbors. Tommy helped me down from the aircraft, his hand steady and reassuring on my arm. "Remember?" he said quietly as we walked across the park toward the street. "You don't owe them explanations. You don't owe them anything." By the time we reached Kalia's driveway, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at what they probably thought was a respectful distance. Louis was trying to look stern and authoritative, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Kalia just looked confused. "Mom?" she called out as we approached. "What's going on? Whose helicopter is that?" Tommy stepped slightly in front of me, a protective gesture that reminded me of the teenage boy who used to walk me to my car after late shifts at the diner. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. "I believe you met my mother last night." Kalia's mouth opened slightly. "Your mother? I don't understand." "Ada Morrison, the woman you turned away from your door, the woman your husband called homeless." Tommy's voice was perfectly controlled, but I could hear the steel underneath. Louis stepped forward, clearly trying to reassert some authority. "Now wait just a minute. I don't know who you are or why you think you can—" "Thomas Peterson," Tommy interrupted, extending his hand in a gesture that looked polite, but somehow made Louis step backward. "You might know me better as Tommy Peterson. I used to live next door to Ada when I was a child." I watched the color drain from Louis's face as recognition dawned. Even in our small town, Tommy's success story had become legendary. The poor kid who'd made it to MIT, who'd built a tech empire, who'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine just 6 months ago. "You're that Tommy Peterson?" Kalia whispered, her eyes darting between Tommy and me. "The billionaire?" "I prefer to think of myself as Ada Morrison's son," Tommy said simply. "The son who's going to make sure she never has to ask anyone for help again." The neighbors were getting closer now, drawn by the obvious tension and the increasingly surreal nature of the conversation happening in broad daylight on Millbrook's most prestigious street. Louis, to his credit, tried to rally. "Look, Mr. Peterson, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter." "You're absolutely right," Tommy agreed. "It is a family matter. That's why I'm here." He turned to look directly at Kalia. "Your mother raised me from the time I was 8 years old. She fed me when my own parents wouldn't, helped me with homework when they were too drunk to care, and made sure I had clean clothes for school. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on her table, and she always made room for one more." Kalia's face was getting redder by the minute. "She never told me you two were still in touch." "We weren't," Tommy said. "Last night was the first time we'd spoken in 15 years. She called me because she had nowhere else to go. Because the daughter she raised, the daughter she sacrificed everything for, slammed the door in her face when she needed help most. We have our own family to think about." Louis started. "Family." Tommy repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Let me tell you about family, Mr. Randolph. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't call each other homeless. And family sure as hell doesn't worry more about a Persian rug than the woman who gave up her own dreams so her daughter could have everything." The small crowd of neighbors was close enough now to hear every word. I could see phones being pulled out, probably to record this confrontation that would be gossip gold for months to come. "Tommy, please," I said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "This is enough." He looked down at me, his expression softening immediately. "No, Miss Ada. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start." He turned back to Kalia and Louis. "I want you both to understand something. Ada Morrison is the most important person in my life. She always has been, and she always will be. From this day forward, anything she needs, anything she wants, she gets. No questions asked." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is the deed to a house about an hour from here. 7 bedrooms, 10 acres, full-time staff if she wants it. It's hers now, free and clear." Kalia's eyes widened as she stared at the envelope. 7 bedrooms? I also set up a trust fund in her name this morning. $25 million. She'll never have to worry about money again. Tommy's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather instead of an amount of money that would change someone's life forever. $25 million. I felt dizzy. The farmhouse that had burned down was worth maybe $200,000, and that included the land. Louis looked like he might be sick. 25 million? That's just the start, Tommy continued, his eyes never leaving Kalia's face. Miss Ada doesn't just get a house and money. She gets everything I have, every resource, every connection, every door that my success can open. She gets a family who actually appreciates what she's done. She already has a family, Kalia said weakly. Tommy shook his head. No, she had a daughter. A daughter who taught her last night that sometimes the family you choose is more loyal than the family you're born into. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighbors had stopped murmuring, sensing that they were witnessing something that would define relationships for years to come. Finally, Tommy turned back to me. Miss Ada, there's a car waiting to take you to your new home. The staff is expecting you, and I've arranged for someone to take you shopping for anything you need. Would you like to go see it? I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. As we turned to walk back toward the helicopter, Kalia's voice stopped us. Mom, wait. Can we talk? I turned around slowly. My daughter looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what she'd just learned. What would you like to talk about, sweetheart? I made a mistake last night. I should have. Louis and I were just... She stumbled over the words, clearly struggling to find a way to undo what couldn't be undone. Tommy stepped forward again, his voice gentle but final. Mrs. Morrison, mistakes are when you forget to return a phone call or show up late to dinner. What you did last night wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, and choices have consequences. As the helicopter lifted off, I looked down at Kalia standing in her perfect yard in front of her perfect house, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, but pity. She had no idea what she'd lost until it was too late to get it back. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and my daughter's education was just beginning. The house Tommy bought me was nothing like I'd ever imagined living in. Sitting on 10 acres of rolling hills, it was a colonial-style mansion with white pillars and wraparound porches that looked like something from a magazine. The staff, a housekeeper named Maria, a groundskeeper named Frank, and a cook named Elena, treated me like royalty from the moment I walked through the front door. This is your home now, Mrs. Morrison, Maria said warmly as she showed me through room after room of elegant furniture and pristine decor. Mr. Peterson made it very clear that anything you need, anything you want changed, you just have to ask. That first week passed in a blur of luxury I'd never experienced. Fresh flowers delivered daily, meals prepared exactly to my preferences. A wardrobe consultant who helped me shop for clothes that actually fit properly for the first time in decades. I felt like Cinderella, except my fairy godmother was a billionaire who still called me his real mother. Tommy visited every few days, always bringing something thoughtful. Books he thought I'd enjoy, photos he'd found of our old neighborhood, news about mutual acquaintances from Millbrook, but mostly, he just wanted to sit with me on the front porch, drinking coffee and talking like we used to when he was a teenager. Are you happy here? He asked during one of those visits, studying my face carefully. I looked out over the manicured gardens, the small lake with its fountain, the life of ease and comfort that had replaced my burned-down farmhouse. It's beautiful, Tommy. More beautiful than anything I ever dreamed of. That's not what I asked. I smiled at his persistence. Even as a child, he'd had a way of seeing through polite answers to the truth underneath. I'm adjusting. It's a lot to get used to. We can get you a different house if you prefer. Smaller, maybe? Closer to town? No, sweetheart. This is perfect. I'm just not used to having people take care of me instead of the other way around. He reached over and squeezed my hand. You spent 40-something years taking care of everyone else. It's your turn now. That same evening, as I was settling in with a book in what the staff called the library, an actual library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a rolling ladder, Maria knocked on the door. "Mrs. Morrison? Your daughter is here. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." My stomach clenched. I'd been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. "Show her in, please." Kalia appeared in the doorway a moment later, her eyes wide as she took in the elegant room. She'd clearly dressed carefully for this visit. Her best dress, her most expensive jewelry, her hair styled in the way she thought made her look most appealing. "Mom," she stood there uncertainly, like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to enter fully. "Come in, sweetheart. Sit down." She perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she cleared her throat. "This place is incredible." "It is. I had no idea Tommy Peterson had done so well for himself. I mean, I knew he was successful, but this level of wealth." She gestured around the room. "He's done very well." Another silence. I could see her struggling with how to approach whatever she'd come to say. Finally, the words burst out of her. "Mom, I made a terrible mistake the other night. Louis and I both did. We were shocked, unprepared, and we reacted badly. But you have to understand, we never meant to hurt you." I studied her face, looking for genuine remorse and seeing mostly panic. "What did you mean to do then?" "We just thought, you're so independent, so capable. We figured you'd work something out on your own. We didn't realize how serious the situation was." "I told you I'd lost everything in the fire, Kalia. How much more serious did it need to be?" Her cheeks flushed. "You're right. You're absolutely right. But Mom, we can fix this. Louis and I have been talking, and we want to make things right between us. We want you to come home." "Home?" "To our house. We've prepared the guest room for you. It's all ready. New sheets, fresh flowers, everything you need. You could move in this weekend if you want." I felt a sad smile tugging at my lips. "And Tommy's house? Tommy's money? His trust fund? What happens to all of that?" Kalia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something desperate and calculating underneath. "Well, you don't really need all this, do you? This house is so big, so impersonal. Wouldn't you rather be with family?" There it was, the real reason for her visit. She wanted me to give up the life Tommy had provided and come live in their guest room, where they could be close to me, and to the $25 million trust fund. "I see." I stood up slowly. "And what does Louis think about having his homeless mother-in-law move in permanently?" "He feels terrible about what he said. He wants to apologize personally." "How generous of him." Kalia stood too, moving closer to me. "Mom, please. I know we hurt you, but we're family. We're your real family. This Tommy Peterson, yes, you helped him when he was a child, but that was a long time ago. He's just feeling guilty because he never stayed in touch. Once that guilt wears off, where will you be?" The words hit their target, awakening fears I'd been trying to suppress. What if she was right? What if Tommy's generosity was just temporary guilt, and once it faded, I'd be alone again? But then I remembered his face when he stepped off that helicopter, the fierce protectiveness in his voice when he confronted Louis, the way he still called me his mother. "You're worried he'll abandon me the way you did?" Kalia flinched. "That's not fair." "We didn't abandon you. You slammed the door in my face, Kalia. Your husband called me homeless and said I'd ruin his Persian rug. How is that not abandonment? We were protecting our home, our lifestyle. From your own mother." The words hung in the air between us. Kalia's composure finally cracked completely. "Fine. Yes, we were protecting ourselves from you, from your problems, your neediness, your constant reminders of everything we've worked so hard to rise above." The ugly truth poured out of her like poison. "Do you think it's easy being your daughter? Do you think I enjoyed growing up poor, watching you work yourself to death, being embarrassed by our secondhand everything while my friends had nice things?" I absorbed each word like a physical blow. "I did my best, Kalia. I gave you everything I could. I know you did." Tears were streaming down her face now. "And I'm grateful. I really am." But I spent my whole childhood promising myself I'd never live like that again. I'd never be poor, never be looked down on, never have to worry about money. Louis gave me that security, and I threatened it. Yes, no, I don't know. She sank back into the chair, her perfect facade completely demolished. I just know that when I saw you standing there with your soot-covered clothes and your desperate eyes, you looked like everything I'd run away from, and I panicked. The honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. For the first time since she'd arrived, I felt like I was talking to my real daughter instead of a carefully crafted performance. And now? I asked gently. Now I realize I might have thrown away the most important relationship in my life for the sake of a Persian rug and social appearances. Her voice was small, defeated. I want to fix this, Mom. I need to fix this. I sat back down across from her. What you need and what you want might be two different things, sweetheart. What do you mean? You want to fix this because you've seen what I mean to Tommy, and you've realized there might be benefits to having me in your life. But do you actually want me, Kalia? Do you want your mother with all my flaws and limitations and embarrassing history? Or do you want access to what my relationship with Tommy might provide? She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of a lifetime of complicated emotions. I don't know how to answer that, she finally admitted. At least that's honest. What I do know, she continued, is that I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was ashamed of our circumstances, and I know that losing you would destroy me. I reached over and took her hand. You haven't lost me, sweetheart. But the relationship we had before, the one where I gave and you took it for granted, that relationship is gone. It burned up with my farmhouse. Then what's left? I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe something better than what we had before. But that's up to you to decide. She squeezed my hand. How do I decide? You start by going home to Louis and thinking about what kind of daughter you want to be going forward. Not what kind of daughter you think I want, or what kind will get you the most benefit, but what kind feels right to you. And you? What will you be doing while I'm figuring that out? I looked around the beautiful library, thought about Tommy's upcoming visit, about the peaceful life I was building in this place where I was valued simply for being myself. I'll be living my life, Kalia. For the first time in decades, I'll be living just for me. After she left, I sat alone in the library for a long time, processing everything she'd said. The truth was painful, but it was also freeing. At least now I knew where I stood with my daughter. At least now I could stop hoping for something that had never really existed. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tommy. Hope you're having a good evening. Elena mentioned she's making your favorite pot roast tomorrow. Can't wait to join you for dinner. I smiled, feeling the knot in my chest loosen slightly. Some family is chosen, not born. And sometimes, the family that chooses you loves you better than the family that shares your blood ever could. Kalia would have to decide what kind of daughter she wanted to be. But I already knew what kind of son Tommy was. The kind who flew 3,000 miles to rescue the woman who'd rescued him first. 6 months later, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Kalia's number, her 5th attempt to reach me this week. I let it go to voicemail. It wasn't that I was angry with her anymore. Anger required too much energy, and I'd found better uses for mine. I was learning to paint watercolors with an instructor Tommy had found for me. I was volunteering at the regional animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I was taking a literature class at the community college, reading books I'd always meant to get to during those 40 years of working 3 jobs and raising ungrateful children. Most importantly, I was learning what it felt like to be someone's priority instead of someone's obligation. Tommy visited every week, sometimes twice a week when his schedule allowed. He'd bring his laptop and work from my kitchen table while I cooked, just like when he was a teenager. Sometimes he brought colleagues to introduce to me, brilliant, accomplished people who treated me with the respect due to someone who'd shaped their boss's character. This is Ada, he'd tell them. She taught me everything that matters about integrity and loyalty. Everything good about who I am started at her kitchen table. Last month, he'd surprised me by having that kitchen table shipped from the old farmhouse ruins. Somehow his people had found it intact in the debris, barely damaged. Now it sat in my new kitchen, scarred and familiar, a bridge between my old life and my new one. The voicemail notification chimed. Against my better judgment, I played Kalia's message. Mom, it's me again. I know you're probably tired of hearing from me, but I really need to talk to you. Things have gotten complicated and Her voice broke. I need your advice. Please call me back. I deleted the message without a second thought. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and Kalia was still learning hers. Through mutual acquaintances, I'd heard about those consequences. Louis had been passed over for a promotion at his firm after word spread about how he'd treated me. Apparently, his boss was a woman who didn't appreciate men who called their mothers-in-law homeless. Their social standing in Millbrook had plummeted once the story got out. And in a small town, stories like that always get out. More significantly, Louis's business had started losing clients. Several of his wealthiest customers had mentioned they were uncomfortable working with someone who showed such disrespect to family. In their circle, reputation was everything, and Louis's reputation was now toxic. The financial pressure was mounting. I'd heard they'd had to sell Louis's BMW and were considering downsizing their house. The Persian rug that was more important than his mother-in-law's welfare had been sold on eBay 3 months ago. But Kalia's real punishment wasn't financial. It was watching other people receive what she'd thrown away. Tommy had started a foundation focused on supporting single mothers in rural communities, women who reminded him of me during those difficult years after Frank died. He'd invited me to serve on the board, and I'd discovered I had a talent for identifying which programs would make the most difference in women's lives. Last week, the foundation had hosted a gala in San Francisco. Tommy had flown me out for it, put me up in a penthouse suite, bought me a gown that cost more than I used to make in 3 months. I'd walked into that ballroom on his arm, introduced as my mother, Ada Morrison, to tech billionaires, politicians, and celebrities who'd actually heard of me through Tommy's stories. The event raised $12 million for single mothers. $12 million that would provide childcare, education assistance, and emergency funds for women who were struggling the way I'd struggled. As I stood on that stage thanking the donors, I thought about the scared young mother I'd been 30 years ago, working myself to exhaustion just to keep a roof over our heads. That woman could never have imagined she'd someday be standing in a ballroom full of the most powerful people in the world, advocating for other women like herself. The local newspaper had run a photo of Tommy and me at the gala. In it, we're both smiling, his arm around my shoulders, and I'm wearing a silver necklace he'd given me, a simple pendant that read, World's Greatest Mom. I knew Kalia had seen the photo, because 3 days later, she'd driven to my house uninvited. Mom, we need to talk, she'd said, standing on my front porch in a cheap dress I didn't recognize. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect hair. She looked tired, older, desperate. We really don't, I'd replied calmly. I've lost everything. Louis filed for divorce last month. He blamed me for ruining his career, said marrying me was the worst decision he ever made. Tears had started flowing. I'm living in a studio apartment above the laundromat. I'm working at the diner where you used to work. The same diner, Mom? Murphy's. I'd felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. I knew what it was like to work at Murphy's, to come home exhausted and smelling like grease. But I'd done it out of love, to support my child. Kalia was doing it because her choices had finally caught up with her. I'm sorry you're struggling, I'd said, and I meant it. But your problems aren't mine to solve anymore. But I'm your daughter. You're a 40-year-old woman who made her choices clearly and deliberately. You chose Louis over me, money over family, appearances over love. Now you have to live with those choices. People make mistakes, Mom. Don't I deserve forgiveness? That's when I'd looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the scared child she was pretending to be, but the calculating woman she'd become. Forgiveness isn't the same as rescue, I'd told her. I forgave you months ago, but forgiving you doesn't mean I'm going to save you from the consequences of your actions. She'd left after that, but not before I'd caught her taking photos of my house with her phone. Probably planning to sell them to some gossip blog, or use them to convince people she still had access to Tommy's wealth through me. This morning, Tommy was coming for our weekly breakfast. He'd been traveling for the past 10 days, closing a deal that would apparently add another $500 million to his net worth. But he'd called every day, checking on me, making sure I was happy and healthy and had everything I needed. I heard his helicopter before I saw it, that familiar sound that had become the soundtrack of my new life. As he walked up the front steps, I marveled again at the transformation. Not just his success, but the way he carried himself now. Confident, powerful, but still gentle when he looked at me. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "How's my favorite mother today?" "Perfect, now that you're here." He settled into the chair beside me, accepting the coffee Maria brought out. "Any word from Kalia this week?" 5 calls. I didn't answer any of them. He nodded approvingly. "Good. You've given her enough chances. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being too harsh." "Miss Ada," he said, taking my hand in both of his, "you spent 30 years being too soft. You gave and gave until you had nothing left. Look where it got you, standing on her doorstep begging for shelter after you'd lost everything." He was right, but it was still difficult to completely let go of the guilt. She's still my daughter. And I'm still your son. The difference is, I chose to be. Every day I wake up grateful that you saved me. Kalia wakes up resentful that you weren't perfect. His voice grew firm. You don't owe her anything more than what you've already given. Later that afternoon, as Tommy worked on his laptop in the kitchen and I prepared dinner, I found myself thinking about the path that had led me here. The fire that destroyed my farm had felt like the end of everything, but it had really been the beginning of learning that I was worth more than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Kalia this time, but from Maria Santos, a woman I'd met through the foundation. She was a single mother of 3 in a small town in Nevada, working 2 jobs and struggling to pay for her daughter's cancer treatments. "Mrs. Morrison," the text read, "the foundation's emergency fund paid for Emma's surgery today. The doctors say she's going to be fine. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for our family. You saved my little girl's life." I showed the message to Tommy, who smiled and squeezed my shoulder. "This is what matters," he said. "This is the legacy you're building." That evening, as I sat on my porch watching another spectacular sunset, I thought about Kalia working her shift at Murphy's Diner, going home to her studio apartment, probably scrolling through photos of my new life on social media and feeling sorry for herself. I thought about Louis, whose social climbing and materialism had cost him everything he thought he valued. And I thought about myself, a 64-year-old woman who'd lost her farm but found her worth, who'd been rejected by her daughter, but embraced by the son she'd chosen to love. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with acceptance. Accepting that you can't save people who don't want to be saved, that you can't love people into loving you back, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people live with the consequences of their choices. My phone rang again, Kalia's number. This time I turned the phone off completely. Tomorrow, Tommy and I were flying to Denver to visit another foundation project. Next week, I was meeting with a publisher who wanted me to write a book about resilience and second chances. Next month, I was taking a cooking class in Tuscany, something I'd dreamed about for decades but never thought I'd be able to afford. I was living the life I'd always deserved but never thought to ask for. And I was living it with people who chose me, valued me, and loved me exactly as I was. The boy I'd saved had saved me right back. And this time, I was smart enough to accept the rescue. Some families are born, some are built, and some are earned through years of loyalty, love, and sacrifice that's recognized and returned instead of taken for granted. I'd finally learned the difference, and it had made all the difference in the world. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.